The wind over the plains of Iraq does not just carry sand. In the collective memory of millions, it carries the scent of burning tents and dried blood. We begin our journey not in the fractured political landscape of 2025, but 13 centuries prior, on the 10th day of Muharram in the year 680 Common Era. Here, on the banks of the Euphrates, a small band of 72 warriors stood isolated against an imperial army numbering in the thousands. This is Karbala, and at its center stands Husayn ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, a man whose choices on this day would cleave the history of Islam into a permanent before and after. To understand the rebellion of the present, we must first walk through the Maqtal, the site of the slaying, and understand the weight of the tragedy that sits at the very heart of Shia theology. For the devout, Karbala is not merely a historical battle, it is a cosmic event. It is the day the blood of God, or Thud-Allah, was spilled onto the earth. The narrative is etched into the believer's soul through the annual rituals of Ashura. We see this in the Taziyeh, the traditional passion plays performed in village squares and city centers across the Shia world. In these reenactments, the visual language is absolute. The family of the Prophet is clad in green, the color of paradise and purity. Their enemies, the forces of the Umayyad caliph Yazid, are draped in red, the color of blood and tyranny. There is no ambiguity here. The audience does not watch passively. They weep, they beat their chests, and they participate in the grief of the Imam, who was denied water for 3 days before being massacred. This ritualized mourning serves a profound theological purpose. It is grounded in the principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the wrong. Husayn's refusal to pledge allegiance to Yazid was not a bid for political power, but a spiritual stance against corruption. He famously declared, "Death with dignity is better than a life of humiliation." This sentiment created a dualistic worldview that defines Shia identity. There is always a Husayn, the archetype of the oppressed righteous, and there is always a Yazid, the archetype of the usurping tyrant. For centuries, this paradigm provided a framework for spiritual survival. To weep for Husayn was to align oneself with divine justice. To mourn the tragedy was to protest, quietly and internally, against the injustices of the world. The tears shed during the Rauda, the storytelling gatherings, were tears of connection, washing away the distance between the mourner and the martyr. It established a sanctity around the very act of resistance, elevating the victim above the victor. The physical defeat of Husayn became his spiritual victory, proving that truth does not need an army to survive, it only needs a witness. However, this foundational myth contains a dormant volatility. If the world is permanently divided into the camps of Husayn and Yazid, then every generation must ask itself, who is who right now? For centuries, the answer was abstract or historical, but as we approach the modern era, and specifically the transformative events of 2025, the stability of these symbols begins to fracture. The reverence for the Mazlum, the oppressed one, creates a powerful vacuum waiting to be filled. When a society steeped in this narrative looks at its own reality and sees disparity, coercion, and violence, the ancient script of Karbala begins to bleed into the present. The stage is set, the costumes are ready, but the actors are about to change roles in a way that no theologian could have predicted. The streets of Tehran, 1979. The air is thick with revolution, and the chants echoing off the concrete walls are not secular slogans but religious invocations. Ayatollah Khomeini, the architect of the Islamic Republic, masterfully wielded the weapon of Karbala against the Shah. In the eyes of the revolutionaries, the Shah was the modern Yazid, a westernized tyrant drinking wine while his people starved, and the people were the camp of Husayn, rising up to reclaim justice. The imagery of Ashura provided the metaphysical fuel for the revolution. It was a perfect overlay. The blood of the martyrs on the streets of Tehran mingled with the memory of the blood on the sands of Karbala. The victory of 1979 was, in many ways, the victory of the Ashura narrative. The state that emerged was built on this legitimacy, styling itself as the guardian of Husayn's legacy. But time is a relentless editor of narratives. Move forward to July 2025. The heat of the Iranian summer is oppressive, matched only by the intensity of the Plan Noor enforcement patrols. The religious calendar brings the faithful once again to the month of Muharram. The state prepares for the standard state-sanctioned processions, expecting the usual outpouring of loyalty. Instead, they witness a stunning theological reversal. The noha, the rhythmic lamentation chants that act as the heartbeat of the procession, have mutated. In the city of Yazid, famous for its disciplined and poetic mourning circles, the lyrics being chanted by thousands of men in unison are not about the Umayyad army of the 7th century. They are about the corruption of the pious, the hypocrisy of the judge, and the baton of the enforcer. This phenomenon, dubbed the White Ashura by some observers due to the wearing of white shrouds or armbands symbolizing a willingness to die for truth, represents a crisis of legitimacy for the theocratic state. The protesters have effectively stolen the state's own foundational myth. When a chanter cries out, "Oh, they who use religion to plunder the people," and the crowd responds with a thunderous beat of the chest, they are engaging in a sophisticated act of political subversion. They are identifying the militarized police and the besieged militia not as the defenders of the faith, but as the shimmer, the villain who severed Husayn's head. The irony is piercing. The Islamic Republic has spent decades educating its population on the duty to resist tyranny, to speak truth to power, and to never accept humiliation. In 2025, the population applied those very lessons to the teachers themselves. We see videos emerging of processions where the banners of Husayn are held high alongside slogans demanding freedom, creating a visual cognitive dissonance that shatters the state's monopoly on religious symbolism. The army of Yazid is no longer a historical abstraction. For these mourners, it is the van waiting to arrest women for their attire. This reversal is far more dangerous to the establishment than a secular protest. A secular protest can be dismissed as Western-influenced or anti-Islamic, but how does a theocracy counter a protest that is speaking its own language? How do you silence a crowd that is chanting for justice in the name of the imam you claim to represent? This is the battleground of 2025, not a physical war for territory, but a spiritual war for the ownership of the Karbala narrative. The archetypes have drifted from their moorings, and in the chaos of this realignment, the sanctity of the ritual has become the sharpest blade of the rebellion. In the devastating aftermath of the Battle of Karbala, when the dust settled and the silence of death descended upon the Euphrates, the military fight was over. Husayn was dead. But the war for the narrative had just begun. This second phase of Karbala was led not by a warrior with a sword, but by a woman in chains, Zaynab bint Ali, the sister of Husayn. It was Zaynab who was marched as a captive to the court of Yazid in Damascus. It was Zaynab who, amidst her grief and humiliation, stood tall and delivered a sermon that shook the foundations of the caliphate. She did not weep for mercy. She condemned the tyrant to his face, preserving the message of her brother and ensuring that his sacrifice would not be erased from history. She is the lioness of Karbala, the archetype of defiance and the ultimate witness to truth. It is this figure, Zaynab, who casts the longest shadow over the events of Ashura 2025. The modern woman life freedom movement, often analyzed through secular or feminist lenses, found a profound resonance within the religious phenomenology of Ashura. In 2025, we witnessed a new form of ritual participation, women standing in the midst or on the periphery of the male-dominated processions. They stood unveiled, silent, and solemn. They did not shout, they did not riot, they simply stood, often dressed in black or white, embodying a living Karbala. This silent standing is a potent invocation of Zaynab's spirit. By refusing to retreat, by refusing to be invisible, these women are reenacting Zaynab's role as the witness who refuses to be silenced by the state. The state's enforcement of the hijab is framed by the authorities as a religious mandate, but the women defying it during Ashura are reframing their defiance as a religious act of Zaynab-like courage. They are asserting that true modesty and dignity come from the character of the soul and the refusal to bow to oppression, just as Zaynab refused to bow to Yazid. The White Ashura also brings into focus the concept of sabr and istikamat. The women of 2025 are not passive. Their silence is a roar. It is an active patience that mirrors the endurance of the women of the holy household after the massacre. By claiming the mantle of Zaynab, these protesters insulate themselves against the charge of being anti-religious. They are forcing the onlookers to ask, if these women are Zaynab, then who are the men beating them? This brings us to the precipice of a new Karbala paradigm. For decades, the story of Husayn was a story of a man fighting for a just government. Now, it is evolving into a story of human rights, of individual dignity against state machinery, and specifically of women's agency in the face of patriarchy. The liturgy has revolted. When the rituals designed to reinforce the state's authority are spontaneously repurposed to dismantle it, the state loses something more vital than territory. It loses its soul. The events of 2025 suggest that the memory of Karbala is too vast, too primal, and too revolutionary to be contained by any single government. It belongs to the oppressed, whoever they may be. And in 2025, the mourners decided that the oppressed were themselves.